Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to take a normal DualSense PS5 controller and upgrade it into the ultimate Steam Deck controller. So, let's start at the beginning. As someone who uses the Steam Deck docked all the time, I had a few problems with existing controllers. Xbox Series controllers don't have paddles or a way to, and have Bluetooth issues. Xbox Elite controllers are great, but the Bluetooth is still finicky and all four of mine have a broken right bumper that I am sick of fixing. Switch Pro controllers are too small for my hands, and GuliKit and 8BitDo controllers are great, but they lead me to the common issue with all of these controllers. None of them have a good way to interact with a mouse cursor. Sure, Steam Input can help with that in-game, but if I want to interact with desktop mode well, then I need something with a trackpad, like the deck itself. That leaves me with three options. The Steam controller, which isn't made anymore, the DualShock 4, which is too small for my hands, and the DualSense. Out of these, the DualSense is the obvious answer, but it has a few issues. Firstly, the battery life isn't very good, and I always find myself needing to charge in the middle of a game session. Secondly, there isn't a controller customization option like with Xbox controllers on their site with the market. And lastly, there aren't paddles, which limits my ability to use the face buttons at the same time as my right analog stick. And that leads me to how we're gonna fix each of these issues. For the battery life, I purchased this Batmax battery from Amazon, which for only $16 is almost triple the capacity of the original DualSense battery. For reference, a stock DualSense battery is 1560 milliamp hours, while this one is 4000. This upgrade alone would justify opening the controller up, but there are two more upgrades to talk about before we get to that. But first, a disclosure. The next two upgrades were provided to me for free by Extreme Rate. No money changed hands, and they won't have any visibility into the video before publication. I was actually contacted about a different line of products, and I asked them to try these out separately, as I've used Extreme Rate for controller shell swaps in the past. As a fun fact, this incredibly beaten up Switch Pro controller is using one of their shells from 2019, and it's still holding strong. The first product they sent me is this kit of button replacements in a translucent blue. I personally love a white and blue aesthetic, and I think these will make the controller look amazing. The second product they sent me, and the last one I'll be installing today, is this Rise 4.0 kit, which adds remappable back paddles to your DualSense and is even fully compatible with the PS5 itself. The option I chose has the white rubberized grip and is compatible with the BDM-010 and BDM-020 versions of the DualSense controller. On that note, let's get into compatibility. I'm not sure on the prevalence of the different versions of the DualSense controller, but most internal components are specific to certain versions of the controller itself. In my case, I bought a controller and found that it was a BDM-020, you can tell by putting down the trigger, with Extreme Rate's guide. Then got the buttons and Rise remap kit that was compatible with that version. Before moving on, I want to mention that this portion of today's video is sponsored by Ugreen and their Nexode Pro 100-watt chargers. Fans of the channel will know that I am a big fan of Ugreen products, and I use their power bricks and battery banks for nearly everything. Their new Nexode Pro chargers take all that I like about Ugreen and amp it right up. With 100 watts of charging capacity and up to 3 devices at a time, I can charge nearly anything I need all at one outlet. And with the latest quick charging protocols, it's incredibly fast. It also uses their GaN Infinity and Air Pirate technology to condense the charger down into roughly the same size as the original Nexode 65-watt chargers, which means that you get 37% more power in the same volume. Lastly, they also have Ugreen's Thermal Guard tech, which has millisecond level monitoring for both power and temperature characteristics, keeping the charger very cool and preventing both under and overcharging. If you're interested in getting one of these amazing and space-saving chargers, please check out my link in the description below and get one for yourself. With that, thank you to Ugreen for sponsoring this segment of the video, and let's get back to it. Next up is the installation process, but I'll be going over it quickly. Extreme Rate has some great video guides on how to install each of their mods, so I'll link the two that I used in the description below, and just cover the steps I took here without making this a full tutorial. As a final note, I used my iFixit kit here and a no-name soldering iron to do the assembly. I'll link the iFixit kit in the description in case you want a set of awesome tools. I've been using this for almost a decade now. With that, let's get into the process. First, I removed the bottom faceplate. I popped off the bumpers, unscrewed 4 screws, used the clips to take the back off, remove the battery holder, take out the motor screws, and detach the ribbon cables. Flip the main board, unscrew the white bracing bar, remove the front plate, pop out the trackpad, unscrew the screws holding it together, remove this ribbon cable, solder the thin red wire, reattach the ribbon cable, reassemble the trackpad, reinsert the trackpad into the body, replace the face buttons with the new fancy ones, solder L3 and R3 to the smaller included ribbon, solder the red cable to the larger ribbon, take the trigger assemblies out, open them up, replace the triggers with the new ones, close the triggers, reattach them to the main body, slot the main board back in, cut off the correct parts of the included flex cables, depending on your model of controller, connect them to the appropriate terminals, route them according to the instructions, and reattach the battery holder. Next up, I reseated the battery, but I couldn't find the one that I originally got in Sweden, so I actually got another for this video and recorded some new footage. The battery in the description and the disclaimer is the new larger one, so please excuse the different footage for just a little bit. Reseat and reattach the battery. Stick the ribbon cable to the battery, connect all the flex cables. Put the controller to the side for a moment, attach the paddle assembly casing to the new backplate. Insert the flex cable. Insert the board, piece together the rear paddle assembly, connect it to the casing, and then button the controller back up. With the controller assembled, let's get into the review. The look is largely stock, with a new touch of color that was sorely lacking. There are kits for entire shell replacements if you want, but I'm glad I went with just the buttons since I like the default DualSense look. The feel compared to a basic DualSense is very similar, with 2 obvious differences. The rubberized grips make it much easier to hold, while also being less sweaty when using it for long periods of time. And the paddles now lie where your fingers usually do. Speaking of the paddles, let's talk about them for a second. They're fairly easy to rebind and without any software since you just need to use the button on the back. Unfortunately, I do think that the paddles are a little too easy to press, and I've done it a few times on accident, but it could be considered a positive if you like hair triggers. The other thing I'm not a huge fan of is that you can't treat the paddles as separate inputs. They're always tied to one of the existing buttons. This means that you can't bind them as L4, L5, R4, or R5 like the Steam Deck's paddles. But as long as you don't rely too heavily on Steam input for additional bindings, then you likely won't have an issue. Aside from that though, they do everything that the paddles should do. Keep your thumbs on the analogs while allowing for easier multi-inputs. Moving on to the weight, the controller only gained 19 grams over the default controller for a total of 300 grams, so there's not any perceptible difference to me. As for the battery, arguably my largest complaint about the normal DualSense, the battery life went from about 5 hours of gameplay with the controller unmuted to a much better 13, just shy of the 2.7 times estimate. While it's nowhere near an Xbox Elite controller, it's much easier to actually get through a few game sessions without swapping to new controllers constantly. As for the prices, the replacement front plate is $14, which I think is a little pricey. I'd like to see it at about half of that, no more than $8. The buttons are $13, which I also think are a bit expensive. I'd prefer these to be probably about $10. And the battery is $16. A great deal for the improvement, like it saves you buying an extra controller just to constantly cycle them. And lastly, the Rise 4 remap kit is $45, which I think is just about right for the added functionality. Overall, these will cost $88. Adding to the cost of a new DualSense controller, you get $158, which is $42 cheaper than the DualSense Edge. While the Edge has the benefit of greater software support, our modded version here has roughly 3.8 times the battery life, allows binding without software, is fully customizable, and 27% cheaper. Not bad for less than an hour of work. And that's that. What I believe to be the best controller for use with the Steam Deck dock. Most of this video was actually shot months ago, but I needed to get a new battery for the video and catch up a bit on some other things that I've been working on and wanting to do. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, and super thanks donors. As always, thank you all for watching, and have a great day. Which I think is a little pricey. I'd like to see about